Welcome. Settle in. Let the sounds of the city at night wash over you. It is not the sound of nature. It is the sound of absolute control. A deep and constant hum from the power conduits buried beneath the streets. A soft hiss from the atmospheric processors that scrub the air clean for the city's elite. It is the sound of Elysium, a city of vertical ambition, a gleaming tower of light built on a foundation of perpetual shadow. Tonight's story, The Ghost in the Grid, begins not in the brilliant, manufactured daylight of the city's upper spires. It begins in the digital shadows, the dark spaces between the corporate data streams, the forgotten corners of the old network. It begins with a legend. They call the legend Ghost. A phantom who moves through the web without a trace. A whisper who rights wrongs and exposes truths the corporations would rather keep buried. To the desperate people living in the artificial twilight of the lower city, Ghost is a myth. A silent protector. To the corporations, Ghost is a menace. A problem to be solved. An error to be deleted. But a legend must have a source. A ghost must have a life it left behind. Our guide on this journey is not a digital specter. She is a woman named Vesper. She lives in a place the city has forgotten. A disused horologium. A clockmaker's workshop from a time before the city's heart beat with a single, synchronized pulse. The air here smells of old wood and mineral oil and the faint, coppery scent of aging brass. The only sound is the soft, gentle ticking of 100 different clocks. A grand pendulum clock from old Berlin stood in one corner, its deep, resonant swing a slow and steady heartbeat for the entire room. On a long workbench, a delicate celestial clock, its face a map of constellations long since obscured by the city's light pollution, traced the silent paths of forgotten stars. Vesper sat in the center of this mechanical sanctuary. An old, custom-built terminal flickered before her. It was her only window to the world she fights. She is a woman from a past the city has tried to erase. And she has not forgotten. Her morning ritual was a quiet rebellion. She would brew real coffee, the scent of the roasted beans a stark, organic contrast to the sterile air of the city. She would check her analog weather sensors, a collection of barometers and thermometers that told a truer story of the world outside than the filtered reports on the public network. And she would tend to her clocks, winding each one with a careful, practiced hand. This was her anchor. This was her reality. She paused, looking at a small, faded photograph propped against a stack of books. A picture of two children, their faces bright with a genuine sunlight she hadn't felt in 50 years. Her and her younger brother. It was taken in the Underside district, before the corporations had renamed it the Gloom. Before Origin Dynamics had built their first Sunstone reactor, promising a new age of light and prosperity. She remembered the taste of real water from the community well. She remembered the festivals, the noise, the life. And she remembered the day her brother had gotten sick. The doctors, their faces grim, called it an unidentified environmental pathogen. A new kind of fever. A sickness they couldn't name. It was years later, after she had first sharpened her skills in the digital realm, that she found the first redacted reports. The first hints of a cover-up. That memory, that faded photograph, was the fuel that had powered her silent war for 3 decades. Today, that war would escalate. Vesper initiated the sequence. Her fingers, nimble and sure, moved across the keys of her custom-built console. The commands were not brutish or loud. They were elegant. A whisper of code designed to slide between the digital sentries of a corporate firewall. On her main screen, a complex visualization of a data fortress bloomed. A fortress of crystalline light and sharp angles. It represented the servers of Origin Dynamics. Her intrusion program, a thing of beauty she had coded herself over many years, moved like smoke. It approached the first layer of defense, the Cerberus Gate. It was a vicious piece of software designed by a rival of hers from the old days, a man who believed in digital brute force. It was designed to sniff out unauthorized entry and trap the intruder in a feedback loop of corrupted data. Vesper's program did not try to break the gate. It soothed it. It solved a complex logic puzzle embedded in its core, a riddle her old rival had once posed to her in a smoky data den decades ago. The three heads of the digital watchdog quieted their barking. The gate slid open. The next layer was the mirror maze, a data labyrinth that reflected a hacker's own code back at them, creating an army of hostile copies. A direct assault was impossible. Vesper deployed a decoy, a digital shadow of her intrusion program. It was a simple, elegant piece of code that mimicked her signature perfectly. The maze's defenses latched onto the shadow, chasing it down an endless corridor of reflections while her true program slipped through a side passage unnoticed. She navigated the labyrinth of the corporate servers. She saw financial records, personnel files, strategic plans for expansion into off-world colonies. She ignored it all. She was looking for the dark data, the information Origin kept in its deepest, most encrypted vaults. Finally, she found it. A directory labeled with a simple, innocuous project name: Geothermal Effluent. Waste. Inside, she found the truth. The sunstone reactors were efficient, but they were not clean. They produced a toxic byproduct, a radioactive slurry that could not be neutralized. The official reports claimed it was transported off-world at great expense. Vesper now had the real reports. They showed the truth in stark, cold numbers. The waste was not being shipped away. It was being piped deep into the foundations of the city. It was slowly, silently poisoning the water supply of the lower levels. The levels where the forgotten people lived. The levels where Vesper had grown up. The levels where her brother had gotten sick. A cold, familiar anger settled in her heart. She began to copy the files. She packaged them in a secure, anonymous data bomb. She prepared to release it to the public network. A truth for the city to see. Far above her, in the gleaming central spire of Origin Dynamics, a young man named Jian stared at his own console. His office was sterile, white, silent, a stark contrast to Vesper's cluttered workshop. Jian was the head of network security. He was brilliant, ambitious, and he was bored. He saw the network not as a place of freedom or connection, but as a machine. A machine that needed to be perfectly ordered. The legend of ghosts was a source of constant irritation to him. An imperfection. A relic from a Messier time. An alert chimed softly on his terminal. It was almost silent. He saw the log of the solved riddle at the Cerberus Gate. He saw the faint energy signature of a decoy program dissolving in the mirror maze. It was impossibly subtle. It was beautiful in its complexity. Jian felt a surge of professional admiration. It was quickly replaced by a cold, predatory excitement. It was Ghost. He was sure of it. He did not raise an alarm. He did not lock down the system. That was the old way. That was what Ghost would expect. Instead, he watched. He let the intruder move deeper into the network. He let the Phantom download the files. He wanted to give Ghost a feeling of victory. He wanted the release of the data to be the bait. Because Jian had a new weapon. A project his superiors had been hesitant to approve. It was called the Chronos Worm. The data bomb exploded across the public networks. News feeds in the lower city lit up with the stolen reports. The truth was out. Vesper watched holographic news tickers glitch as they tried to display the forbidden information. She saw live feeds from the lower levels, where people were gathering around public terminals, their faces a mixture of shock and righteous anger. A young man with fire in his eyes, Rorik, was already organizing a protest. She felt a grim satisfaction. This was her work. This was her purpose. But as she monitored the network chatter, she noticed something strange. A piece of code had detached from her data bomb. It was moving backward. It was tracing the path of her intrusion with impossible speed. Her defenses kicked in. Firewalls rose to block it. But the code did not try to break through. It simply stopped at the edge of her protected network. And it began to watch. Vesper frowned. She isolated the strange code. She began to analyze it. Its structure was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not aggressive. It was inquisitive. It seemed to be searching, not for her location, but for her history. Then the first erasure occurred. It was a small thing. An academic journal she had subscribed to under a false identity sent her a cancellation notice. The reason cited was that her account did not exist. She checked the journal's database. Her login was gone. The records showed no trace of her ever having been a subscriber. It was a glitch, she thought. A small error in a chaotic system. Then a larger thing happened. She checked the status of a small pension fund. It was from a job she had held 30 years ago, back when smaller companies still existed. The pension was her emergency fallback. A tiny piece of her old life she had kept safe. The account was gone. She searched the public archives for the company she had worked for. The archives returned an error. No such company had ever been registered. A cold dread washed over her. A dread far deeper than the fear of being caught. This was not a trace program. This was not an attempt to find her physical location. They were not trying to find who she was. They were trying to make it so she never was at all. Her terminal chimed with another alert. It was a message from one of her oldest digital contacts. A black market information broker she had known for decades. The message was simple. Who is this? Why are you using this encryption key? Her blood ran cold. The key was their private key. They had used it for 20 years. To her contact, it was now the key of a stranger. She dove into their shared data haven, a hidden repository of their conversations. It had been rewritten. Her half of every conversation was now attributed to a different alias, a fabricated persona. Her place in her contact's digital life had been surgically removed and replaced. Vesper stared at the screen. The legend of Ghost was built on anonymity, on being a phantom in the machine. But now, her enemies had found a way to turn her greatest strength into her most terrifying vulnerability. How can a ghost fight back when the world itself is being rewritten to forget she ever existed? The clocks in her workshop ticked around her. Each tick was the sound of a moment passing. A moment being logged into history. But her own history was being devoured. The first tendrils of the worm began to probe her core identity records. The foundational files from the old government before the corporate takeover. Her birth certificate. Her family records. The file containing her brother's cause of death. It all began to flicker. The data wavered, threatening to dissolve into meaningless noise. She was not just losing her aliases. She was losing herself. The battle had just begun. And she was already losing. The battle for her existence was a silent, desperate war fought in the heart of the horologium. The Chronos worm was an enemy unlike any she had ever faced. It was not a blunt instrument. It was a surgeon's scalpel, meticulously excising her from the digital fabric of reality. For 2 days she fought. She built new firewalls from scraps of obsolete code. She wove complex mazes of false data to distract the worm. But it was like trying to patch a crumbling dam with sand. For every hole she plugged, the worm found 10 new cracks. learning from her defenses, adapting its methods. She watched her digital life unravel thread by thread. Her aliases, carefully cultivated over decades, blinked out of existence one by one. The bank accounts tied to them were frozen, then deleted. The transaction histories were wiped clean. It was as if the money had never been there. The secure server space she rented in off-world data havens terminated her contracts. The reason given was a failure to provide proof of identity. She watched in horror as her own history was rewritten in real time. An old news article she had once written as a young journalist, exposing a minor city official's corruption, was still there. But the byline now read, "Author unknown." The worm had found a digital archive of her mother's favorite music. It did not delete the archive. It subtly altered the compositions, introducing dissonant notes, turning beautiful melodies into something ugly and unsettling. It was a psychological attack, a way of telling her that nothing she remembered was sacred. Nothing was safe. The most painful blow came when it attacked her medical records. It found the old, anonymized file on her brother's death and changed the cause from unidentified environmental pathogen to congenital respiratory defect, a genetic flaw, a lie that exonerated Origin and placed the blame on her own family. It was a cruel, intimate violation. She felt a wave of nausea. She was being forced to watch her own memories warp into a corporate-approved lie. The ticking of the clocks around her was her only anchor. The steady, mechanical rhythm was a counterpoint to the chaotic dissolution of her digital life. They were real. They were true. She was being hollowed out. Her digital footprint, once a careful tapestry of false trails and hidden paths, was shrinking to a single point. Soon, all that would be left was the heavily shielded network of her workshop. Once the worm had erased every external record of her, it would turn all of its formidable power on that final sanctuary. In his silent, white office, Jian watched the progress with a sense of immense satisfaction. On his main screen, a complex graph showed Ghost's digital presence. It was a vibrant, sprawling web at first. Now, it was a rapidly shrinking star, collapsing in on itself. He was not just defeating an enemy. He was disproving a myth. He was showing the world that in his city, in his network, there were no ghosts. There was only order. His order. Vesper knew she could not win this fight. Not like this. To fight the worm, she had to be connected to the network. But every second she was connected, the worm learned more about her. It found more threads of her past to snip. Her only option was a terrifying one. She had to go dark. She had to sever her own connection. She had to become a true ghost. The worm was hammering at her workshop's final firewall. Alarms screamed on her terminal, strings of red text scrolling too fast to read. It was a race. She worked with a calm that bordered on despair, transferring the last of her essential files onto the isolated data slate. The schematics of the tower. Her custom-built security bypass tools. The small, untraceable fund of cryptocurrency she had hidden for a day like this. The firewall buckled. The worm poured through, its code a ravenous tide. With her last ounce of strength, Vesper initiated the disconnect sequence. She did not just type a command. She rose from her chair and walked to a heavy, iron lever set into the wall. It was a physical cutoff, a relic from an earlier age she had installed herself. She wrapped her hands around the cold metal. She pulled. With a heavy, grinding clank, the hardline connection to the city's network was severed. The stream of data from the outside world stopped. The alarms on her terminal went silent. The screens went dark. For the first time in 30 years, Vesper was completely offline. The silence was deafening. The ticking of her clock seemed to grow louder, each one a monument to a past that now existed only in her own memory, and on the disconnected slates in her workshop. She was isolated. She was safe from the worm. But she was also powerless. A hacker with no access to the network is just a person in a room full of useless electronics. She knew what she had to do. The worm was an artificial intelligence. It was housed on Origen's central servers. It drew its power and its intelligence from their mainframe. To kill the worm, she had to go to its heart. She could no longer launch a digital assault. She had to launch a physical one. The idea was terrifying. She was a woman of code and information, not of action and infiltration. But the ghost in her head, the part of her that was a legend, would not let her surrender. She powered up the isolated slate. She pulled up the schematics of the Origen Tower. Her mind, accustomed to seeing vulnerabilities in code, began to see them in concrete and steel. She began to work. Her workshop, once a digital command center, became a hardware lab. She scavenged parts from old, forgotten devices. The magnetic focusing lens from an ancient data reader. The power cell from a defunct cleaning drone. The timing chip from a bomb disposal unit she had acquired years ago. She was building a tool. A physical key to a digital lock. But she could not do it alone. She needed a distraction. Someone on the outside. She thought of the people in the lower city. The people who were now protesting because of the data she had released. They believed in the legend of Ghost. She had to ask one of them to trust the reality. She used an old, almost forgotten piece of technology. A short-range sonic encryptor that could send a small burst of data to a receiver without touching the main network. She sent a message to a public terminal in a crowded market square in the lower levels. The message was addressed to the young activist, Rorik. His family had been among the first to sicken from the poisoned water. He was the leader of the protests. He was loud. He was angry. And he was her only hope. The message was simple. I am Ghost. I can stop Origen. But I need your help. Create a diversion at the main tower tomorrow at midnight. Keep their attention on the streets. I will do the rest. The message arrived on Rorik's slate in the middle of a protest planning session. He was in a disused warehouse, surrounded by other activists. He read the message, his eyes wide. What is it? A young woman asked. It's from Ghost, he whispered. The room fell silent. His friends crowded around. They read the message. Their reactions were a mixture of awe and suspicion. It's a trap, one of them said immediately. Origen is trying to lure us into an ambush. But what if it's real? Rorik countered. What if this is our chance to do something that actually matters? The argument raged for an hour. It was a risk. A massive one. But Rorik thought of his family. He thought of the helplessness he felt every day. He looked at the faces of his friends, tired but defiant. He made his decision. We're doing it, he said, his voice firm. We're putting our faith in a ghost. The night of the infiltration was cold. A sharp wind whipped through the canyons of Silesium. In her workshop, Vesper pulled on the simple gray uniform of a maintenance worker. The fabric felt foreign and rough against her skin. She checked her tools one last time. The small, localized EMPs. The frequency jammer. And the main device, the electromagnetic resonator, heavy and dense in her bag. In the warehouse in the lower city, Rorik rallied his protesters. He looked at their faces, a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He hoped he had not just led them all to their doom. Vesper stood in the shadows of an alley across from the Origen Tower. The building was a monument to corporate power. A spear of light that pierced the smoggy sky. It seemed untouchable. Her heart pounded in her chest. Then she heard it. A chant. It started small, then grew into a roar. A crowd of protesters was marching towards the tower, their faces illuminated by the glow of holographic protest signs. At their head, she saw Rorik, his voice amplified, shouting slogans of defiance. He had come. The protesters surged towards the main entrance of the tower. Origin's security forces in black armor moved to form a line, their shields locked together. The plaza became a chaotic scene of shouting and flashing lights. Jian, in his control room, watched the scene with detached annoyance. A predictable outburst from the lower class. He dispatched a riot control unit and focused his attention on containing the crowd. His eyes were on the obvious threat. Not on the quiet side alley where a lone maintenance worker slipped into a ventilation shaft. The shaft was dark, narrow. The air was cold and smelled of ozone. Vesper moved slowly, deliberately. Every movement was planned. She consulted the schematics on her slate. She moved through the guts of the building. A ghost in the machine in the most literal sense. She came to her first obstacle. A sonic fence, an invisible barrier that would trigger an alarm. Her analog frequency detector picked up its low hum. She found the power conduit and attached a small bypass clip. The hum died for a 60-second window. She slipped through. Further in, she heard a soft, skittering sound. She froze, pressing herself into a tiny alcove. A cleaner drone, a spider-like machine with glowing optical sensors, scuttled past. Its legs clicked on the metal floor of the shaft. Its sensors swept the darkness, missing her by inches. She held her breath until it was gone. Finally, she reached the corridor leading to the server room. The floor was pressure-sensitive. The schematic showed a safe path, a sequence of specific tiles that would not trigger the alarm. It was a deadly dance, each step precise and calculated. She reached the server core room. It was a vast, cold chamber. Rows upon rows of humming server racks stood like monoliths. In the center of the room, suspended in a magnetic field, was a glowing, crystalline processor. The heart of the Chronos worm. The room was not empty. 2 armed guards stood by the entrance. Vesper knew she could not fight them. But she did not have to. She had hacked their work schedules. She knew that in 3 minutes, they were due for a shift change. A moment of distraction. A small window of opportunity. She waited in the darkness of a service hatch. The 3 minutes felt like an eternity. The hum of the servers was a monstrous heartbeat. Then, she heard the door hiss open. The guards exchanged a few words with their replacements. One of the new guards dropped his keycard. He bent to pick it up, his partner laughing. For a few precious seconds, all 4 of them were distracted. Vesper moved. She was silent. Swift. She reached the base of the central processor. She pulled the electromagnetic resonator from her bag. She attached it to the cooling conduit. She armed it. And she slipped back into the shadows. In his control room, Jian finally noticed something was wrong. The protest was a little too organized. A little too effective at drawing all his resources to the front of the building. A nagging feeling made him check the internal sensors. He saw the log of the sonic fence disabling and re-enabling. He saw a momentary pressure anomaly on the server room floor. His blood ran cold. He zoomed in the security camera for that corridor. He saw nothing at first. Then, he enhanced the image, running it through a motion detection filter. He saw a flicker of movement. A small, gray figure in the shadows. He felt a jolt of disbelief. It was a physical intruder. An old woman. He slammed his hand on the alarm. He dispatched a security team. But he knew he was too late. He had been completely outmaneuvered. The digital master had been beaten by an analog solution. Vesper, hidden in the service hatch, pressed the trigger on her remote. The resonator emitted a high-frequency pulse. It was silent, invisible, but in the server core, the glowing processor flickered. Its light wavered, turned a sick, distorted color, and then went dark. The hum in the room changed. It faltered. The Chronos worm was dead. The tower's internal systems glitched. Lights flickered. Alarms blared. Vesper did not wait to see the aftermath. She was already moving. She retraced her steps through the ventilation shafts, the chaos of the lockdown covering her escape. She emerged into a deserted alleyway as the sounds of sirens filled the air. The protest was scattering. Her part in this was done. She returned to her workshop. The silence felt different now. It was a peaceful silence, not a forced one. She powered up her terminal. She took a deep breath and reconnected to the network. She ran a search for her oldest alias. An entry appeared. An old press credential from 30 years ago. It was faint. The data was corrupted. But it was there. She searched for the pension fund. The account was there too. Its balance was 0. But the account existed. She was no longer erased. The Chronos worm was dead. Its death had stopped the erasures. But it had not restored what was lost. Her digital history was a ruin. A collection of fragmented files and broken links. The altered music of her mother remained dissonant, a permanent, ugly scar in the archive. She was a digital ghost in a new sense. A person made of echoes and whispers of data. It was not a total victory. Origen was still in power. Jian was still her enemy. And now, he knew her methods. The world had not been saved. But she had fought back. She had proven that a person was more than their data. That a history could not be completely deleted as long as one person was alive to remember it. She looked at the clocks ticking around her. Each one a keeper of a single, stubborn truth. A testament to a past that had survived. She was Vesper. She was Ghost. And she remained. The fight was not over. But for tonight, in the quiet of her sanctuary, there was peace.